Is now in police custody, accused of holding her stepson captive for more than 20 years. And the details of this alleged abuse really horrific.
Police say a man was found inside a home after a fire last month.
According to court documents, it began when he was in the 4th grade. He's now 31 years old.
The investigation started almost a month ago when a fire sparked at the home on Blake Street. Investigators say one of the people living there intentionally set that fire because he wanted his, quote, freedom.
Now, the arrest warrant details the horrific conditions that this man told police he endured. When he was taken to the hospital, he only weighed about 68 pounds. He told police he would be given only 2 cups of water a day, was locked in his room 22 to 24 hours a day. He was only allowed out to do chores for his stepmother, at most getting 1 minute of time outside to let the dog out. Now, he was pulled out of school in 4th grade and said he had no contact with anyone outside of his home. According to the arrest warrant, the last 2 reports of well-being checks are from April of 2005. He told police only his stepmother, his now deceased father, 2 half-sisters, and deceased grandmother knew of the situation, telling police he was kept a secret his entire life. Her 56-year-old Kimberly Sullivan of Waterbury was arrested by police today. But on February 17th, the Waterbury Fire Department was called to a house on Blake Street. 2 people were home at the time, Sullivan and the victim.
Okay, let's get to this one. Ooh. So her name, the stepmother, is Kimberly Sullivan. The victim's name has not been disclosed, obviously for privacy reasons. The fire happened on February the 13th. So a month later, we're just now hearing about this. 2 different news sources here. One says the victim is 31. Others say that he's 32. I did the math on that. That means he would have been born in 1994. 5'9", he weighed only 68 pounds. Let's say kindergarten starts around age 5, right? So if they pulled him out of school in the 4th grade, that means he would have been 9 to 10 years old at the time that they pulled him out of school. April of 2005 was around 11 years old, and that was the last welfare check. I can imagine that the welfare check had something to do with them eventually pulling him out of school. Someone at school probably reported something on this child. Let's hear what the neighbors say they saw.
I've been out here I don't know how many times with the dogs cutting grass. If he would have just tapped on the window and said, "Help me," I could have helped him.
Shay Baker, his current next-door neighbor, remembers seeing him years ago.
I was just in the backyard playing, and I looked up and saw a boy, and I waved at him. He smiled and waved back, and I hadn't seen him in the house or anywhere around since. So I just figured, like, was family visiting? Is it somebody that I made up? There was just no sign of him being there outside of that day.
I never in a million years would have thought that that was happening across the street from me.
Paula DePina says she used to live next door to the home where police say the man was held captive. She says she would see him in the windows and always thought something was off.
He was always upstairs on the 2nd floor on the window, like there, like looking like a little ghost. Like he was pale, like white. And then I'm like, I don't know why maybe he doesn't like to come out. But I never thought anything was wrong.
I have to say about the neighbor, I don't know if I'd have gotten involved. It depends on how often I'd have seen him. You know, because like that one girl said, he could have been visiting. It's a scary thing. I mean, to report someone to the police for the way that they're treating their child, you better be damn sure you know what you're doing. That's a touchy subject, but gosh, here's another neighbor's reaction.
It never felt right. Even as a kid, it never felt right. I saw him, he waved, like, you know, he was on the backyard for like maybe like 2 seconds.
This is the Sullivan home. That's really the focal point of the story. And just right next door, this is the home where Peter Lopes says he and his family lived from 2003 to 2009. Now, some of those years would end up being highlighted in Kimberly Sullivan's case. That's because they were some of the final years that her stepson was enrolled in school. When Lopes and his family lived next door in the early 2000s, he says the stepson was never outside and never around other people. He says he would often see him peer through a window.
In hindsight, when I was 9, you know, these are little things that you're noticing. But as, you know, a 30-year-old now, I'm looking at it and it's just, there were so many signs.
Lopes and his siblings attended the Barnard School at the same time as the boy. He says he remembers teachers and Principal Tom Pannone asking about the boy and calling home to see if they had seen him, especially when he never showed up to 5th grade.
The support that he was getting, it was just getting nowhere because someone was just playing a much better game.
That does confirm what I just said about the reason he was taken out of school. And so if this kid lived there until 2009, that means he would have lived there from when the victim was 11 years old up to 15 years old. The Connecticut Insider did an interview with one of the detectives. So let's listen in to this one.
Anything so shockingly different than anything any of us have ever worked on. So shockingly different than anything any of us have ever worked on. Again, collectively, our major crimes division, the one I'm in currently, we've probably worked maybe 100 murders over the past, say, 8 years, give or take. And it's as horrific and tragic every one of those homicides are. This is just such a different element. It's just such a different level of evil. Yeah. You know, it's very different than anything we've seen. I had already seen the body cam footage from Detective Page, and I saw the condition that the victim was in. And as bad as the victim looked in that interview, seeing him in person it felt 10 times as worse. You know, I don't want to really put a number on it, but it took everybody off guard. He's recovering. I can never really comment on his actual medical condition at the moment. One, I'm not an expert in, again, the open investigation, but he's recovering. He's slowly recovering, but recovering nonetheless. We speak with him. He's able to follow the conversation. He's able to answer your questions. He's aware. He knows what's going on. It appears there might be something different cognitively with him, but to determine how that came about, that's going to be something that's probably a little over my head. Yeah. But you got to understand that, again, although I'm sitting here like speaking singularly, it is a total group effort that's doing this. It is the Major Crimes Division, is the Detective Bureau, is that first officer on scene, and it was the Waterbury Fire Department who pulled them out of there. It was. Okay. Yep. So when we spoke with our victim, one of the first things he said to Detective Page that morning when he spoke with him was he wanted to thank the fire department for everything he did for him, for pulling him out of there, and for saving his life. Wow. So once our office found out kind of really what was going on, it's really, everybody's been working on this together. Although I'm kind of sitting here speaking, I'm really speaking on behalf of the entire office, to be quite honest. Not only the Major Crimes Division, but the entire office is invested in what's going on with our victim right now. And just knowing his circumstances, we're also in touch with the facility, representatives from the facility that he's at. And so we just kind of learned what are some of the things he might need immediately, you know, whether it's clothes or whatever it may be. So a few of us got together and just kind of said, hey, we're getting a quick collection together to see if we can get a couple of things for our victim. And without hesitation, everybody lines right up and they start donating whatever they can. And a group of detectives actually went out shopping one day and got various clothes or, you know, things that he kind of requested through the staff that he might need in the short term. And those detectives got those together, and when we went out there for our visit, we put things together and made like a little gift package for him in some capacity. Just is a small gesture. It's just so he knows people are thinking about him and how much the police department is invested in his future.
What was his reaction when he got?
Thankful, appreciative, excited, curious as to what may be in there. And he's again, I mentioned his spirit already, but his spirit is just tremendous when you go and see him.
All right, let's listen to what her attorney says initially. We're going to get to the court session. We're going to get to family members outside of the home. But let's first go over and listen to what her attorney is saying. Oh, and if I forgot to mention, the victim is being treated in a medical facility right now. I wasn't sure if that was said or not.
All we have right now are allegations. And yes, sometimes allegations look bad, but that's why we have a process. And that's why we have a defense. And we intend to mount one in this case. And we intend to push back on all the allegations that have been made against her.
That was before they went to court. This is her in court right here.
Sullivan's attorney called the accusations false and put the blame on her late husband.
He was not locked in a room. She did not restrain him in any way. She provided food. She provided shelter. She is blown away by these allegations. He was the biological father. He's the one that dictated how his son would be raised. We think as the evidence comes out, you will see that she's not the villain she's being made out to be.
I don't know. This may not be popular, but what if, you guys, what if after the father died, she stopped locking that door and that boy was just, he had that, what do they call that syndrome? And what if the victim just was so used to like being scared to leave or whatever, he didn't trust that he could actually leave? It makes you kind of wonder. Now, I'm just going off of what the defense just said there. Now, obviously, that might not be true. What it boils down to is it doesn't matter if she started unlocking the door after the father died. She was there during the time that the door was locked, obviously, while he was alive. We're going to get to the father in a minute. I think I found something on him, but I'm not sure if it's him. But we're going to get to that in a minute. Now, let's go over to what was said in court. This is specifically what they've said about the victim himself.
42 years old, and he told police that he was held captive in an 8x9 room in this house here on Blake Street since he was 11 years old.
The warrant also details when he was a child, he was taken out of school after 2 DCF visits.
Now, according to the warrant, DCF was first involved back when the victim was in the 4th grade after he kept complaining that he was always hungry. They made 2 visits to the house, according to the warrant. It's unclear, though, their involvement after those 2 visits. We did reach out to the agency for comment.
He says a lock was put on his outside bedroom door. He got little to no sleep and went hungry, quote, all day, every day, my entire life.
The victim told first responders he believed starting this fire was the only way out of this situation.
He told police investigators he was so hungry he would sometimes eat food out of the garbage at school.
All right, now let's go over to see what happened in the court, what we could get from court anyway.
Police now tell us his stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, here she is in court, allegedly held the victim captive since he was 11 years old. He's now 32. Investigators say he went through prolonged abuse, starvation, severe neglect, and inhumane treatment and weighed just 68 pounds when they found him. Sullivan was taken into custody today, appeared in a Waterbury courtroom this afternoon. She is charged with assault, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, cruelty to persons, and reckless endangerment.
He'd been locked in that room since he was 11. He was given 2 cups of water per day. He'd been locked in there since 4th grade. He lit a fire with some hand sanitizer he recovered, some paper from a printer, and he lit that fire while he was locked in that room from the outside. He lit that fire knowing he could very well die, but he'd been locked in that room for 20 years, and for 20 years he'd been trying to get out of that room. He'd be let out less than 2 hours a day for chores under the supervision of this defendant. He'd then be locked back in that room. This victim, 31 years old, was 5'9", 68 pounds. He had a body mass index of 11%. Under 13% is life-threatening. He was in the stages of dying. Quite frankly, the facts are something out of a horror movie, and that's without exaggeration.
She's being held on a $300,000 bond. And of course, they're going back into court later in the month. So we'll check back in on that. I've already set up an alert for that. I was trying to see when the father passed away. They just said recently. And I did find a Sullivan who passed away in Waterbury. I'm just not positive it's him, but we're going to read it. Now, first, let's go over and hear what the uncle said. The uncle said that when he first saw the boy, he looked like a Holocaust survivor. The man's uncle also told police that he has been unable to see his nephew for 20 years until visiting him in the hospital. So someone was keeping him from seeing him. Now, the man's name is Kurt Sullivan, which leads me to believe that he's the father's brother. The bio mother had not been involved since he was 2 years old. So I guess her family's not involved with him at all. So I find an obituary for a guy named Craig Sullivan out of Waterbury, Connecticut. He passed away on March the 13th of 2025. But that's not going to work because he set the fire on February the 13th. So that's not him. I'm going to keep searching for that because I feel like I'm getting close to finding the father's name. If he died recently, there would be an obituary there for him. But if this was, you see the house and how unkept it looks? What if this is one of those families that both him and the stepmother, they just stayed inside all the time. They didn't interact with the neighbors. You know, they didn't have a lot of friends. They didn't go anywhere. They just went to work and came home. You know, like what if that's the type of life they led and they kept to themselves? I think a lot of times that's what occurs with some of these cases. How do you explain a child that just disappears? But it sounds like this child never, since the age of 9 or 10, he hasn't really been, hasn't appeared anyway. But I just don't understand how it's when a child disappears at the age of 9 or 10, nobody else raises the alarm and says, wait, where's this kid at? This is where this homeschooling problem comes in. Too many times these abusers use the homeschooling thing as a way to get around the child being out in the environment where others can see them physically and see how they act, how they're dressed, if they're clean, if they have any marks on them. I also want to know about this locked from the outside door, because that's very specific, locked from the outside. There was somebody asking questions and they were being shut down. Had to have been. It sounds like possibly the family members could have been. Now, obviously, the reporters were allowed to record some of what was said in court, which is a good sign that maybe, possibly, we'll be able to see this in court. I just kind of wondered how long the father's been gone. If he set the fire on February the 13th, she was arrested, I think, within a week later. Within a week, she was arrested. So she's been in jail all this time and has just now been brought out for getting out on bail. That's a lengthy amount of time waiting around for them to set that hearing. And another thing, too, I want to find out if her attorneys are paid or are they court appointed. Did this man leave them any money? And is she going to end up spending all of the money he left her on defending herself in this case? I don't think she has a leg to stand on. She witnessed it. Even if the father was the one that initiated it and kept it going for years and years and years, she's going to spend some time in jail because she allowed it to happen. She was there. She watched it happen. There's just no way around that. If they can prove it, there's no way around that.
Mark, the woman arrested in this horrific case is free on bond tonight. However, you'll notice that she hasn't returned to her home here on Blake Street. And if you get a closer look in the windows, you'll notice that they're still boarded up after police say the victim set his room on fire in order to be rescued. Now, tonight, a lawmaker told me what needs to be done moving forward so this never happens again. Arraigned and handcuffed, but released on bail, Kimberly Sullivan afforded a freedom she allegedly never allowed her stepson, which, according to police, is what led him to setting a fire to escape the home. The victim says DCF made 2 visits back in 2005, once for a welfare check, another because the family wanted to file charges against the school for harassment. According to DCF, none of the abuse and neglect claims were substantiated, so they got rid of the paperwork after 5 years, per state policy. Republican Senator Jason Perillo is the ranking senator on the Children's Committee, which oversees DCF policies in the legislature, and says a thorough investigation needs to be done.
Understand what the schools did, what they knew, what they shared. You know, if there are folks at DCF who are involved in this, who still work there, those folks have to be talked to. Quite honestly, if there are folks involved who don't work there, DCF has an obligation to pursue them and figure out what was done or what could have been done differently.
Let's watch this whole press conference they had earlier today. They muted the mayor. Oh, well. It'll come on in just a second.
It'll be a difficult and painful journey towards recovery. So please keep him in your thoughts and in your prayers. And with that, I will turn it over to Fred Spagnola, our Chief of Police. Thank you,
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. As you all know, on February 17th, around 8:40 p.m., Waterbury police responded to 2 Blake Street on a report of a fire. Officers and fire investigators immediately realized there were some grave concerns about some of the conditions in the house. There were 2 occupants of the house, one being Kimberly Sullivan, the stepmother of the male victim. Officers and fire investigators quickly realized that there was a room in the house that appeared to have locks on it from the exterior portion of the house. They began to speak to the male victim, who disclosed that he was being held captive in the house for an extended period of time, approximately 20 years. The investigation began from that point. We worked closely with the State's Attorney's Office, Maureen Platt, as well as Assistant State's Attorney Don Thurkelson, because frankly, what was being reported was unfathomable to us at that point in time. Through those investigative meetings and through search warrants, we were able to seize physical evidence and conduct interviews and dig up some more information that corroborated the victim's story. This investigation, as the mayor points out, continues. Is very open and very active. We were able to obtain arrest warrants for Kimberly Sullivan. She was arrested yesterday. She was arraigned in Waterbury Superior Court. She's currently being held on a $300,000 bond. At this point, I'll open the floor up for any questions.
The biological father, we've learned that he recently left the home, and our lawyer is saying that we need to look deeper into his part in all of this. When it comes to the investigation, is he being held accountable at all?
The biological father is deceased and died in January of 2024. Prior to that, he was wheelchair bound from some medical conditions.
Also, it was reported to the school system that this boy at the time, now 32-year-old man, he was starving, he was asking other kids for lunch. I mean, is this a failure on the school system that this matter was not taken more seriously?
So we're doing some background investigation. There are two incidents that we had within our computer system of dealing with that address and with the family back in 2005. One was a request from DCF to do a welfare check at the location because children that the victim was familiar with hadn't seen him and they were concerned about him. Officers went to the house. The house was clean. It was lived in. They spoke to the victim at that point in time, and there were no cause for any alarm or any conditions that existed that would have led officers to believe anything other than a normal childhood and a normal family existence was occurring. But that was reported back to DCF, and that was the last that we were involved in that particular investigation. We were called back to the house in the latter part of April by the family who wanted to file a harassment complaint against members of the school district, saying that they were continuously reporting them to DCF and felt that they were trying to get the family in trouble and have the family investigated. We have no further information about where that went, other than there was no proof provided by the family that there was any type of harassment that was occurring. As far as the school district's concerned, we are looking at those records now. We're working with DCF to look at records that they may have from previous investigations, and that's part of the ongoing investigation.
People were filing complaints even if it was with DCF continuously. As the family, I guess, alleged, was there more contact from DCF, and do you know anything about how that was done?
So the only contact we had was back in April of 2005 when we were notified to conduct that welfare check. And again, we're looking for those records now to determine where that investigation may have gone, but there was no further reported information to the Waterbury Police Department.
So when you had an officer go out there that first time, you're saying everything looked normal, it looked like a normal childhood, but the school district, the principal told us that the child looked really small, malnourished, was drinking from a urinal at school, was speaking to a tube. So, I mean, with all that information, the officer still concluded that the child was safe at that time?
Well, the officer didn't have that information. So this former principal is now disclosing all this information, and I believe in the news clips I've reviewed that he was making calls to DCF and other agencies. Waterbury Police were never notified by this particular principal about those conditions. So this is all information that is coming out now as this case unfolds.
I believe he said he called police, but you have no record of that.
Well, I believe he's wrong if that's what he said, because there is no record of it.
Can you talk about, you said that there was some evidence that corroborates the story of the gentleman. Can you talk any more about what that is? Or how do you go about corroborating a story like this that's so extraordinary?
Right. So there's some physical evidence that was seized from the house that does corroborate the fact that that room did have exterior locks on it and a number of different styles of exterior locks, as was explained during an interview with the victim throughout the years. It appeared that the locks increased in security levels as time progressed, and obviously he became older and maybe a little bit stronger. So that's certainly one component, and then there's other components of the fire investigation that are part of the evidence package as well.
And I'm sorry if you said this, but were these the only two individuals living in that home?
Yes, there were two siblings. They were in and out of the home, but they have since moved out.
So say DCF had all this information, the principal is saying, they don't share any of that with police?
You're going to have to talk to DCF about what their protocol is on when they share information with police. DCF does work closely with police departments. It provides a lot of information to police departments in a number of different ways. I don't know what their protocol is on when they share that information, so that would be something that they would have to respond to.
Chief, how is the victim doing now? Obviously, some serious conditions you said about PTSD and depression. What can you share about how the victim's doing?
Right, so obviously he's got a lot of mental health issues that he has to deal with at this point in time. There are a lot of physical conditions that he's working on as well. I mean, here's an adult that was 5'9" and 68 pounds. There's some apparent orthopedic issues. The room was very small. Honestly, when I read about it and talk to the investigators and overlook the interviews, it was worse than the conditions of a jail cell. So there's a lot of physical therapy that he'll have to go through. There's a lot of healing that he'll have to go through mentally. And I can tell you this: our investigators, and I'll specifically point out Detective Steve Brownell and Detective John Pace, who were the lead investigators in this particular case. But all the investigators, the entire Criminal Investigations Bureau, has been very supportive of the victim. They took a collection up and bought him some items to try to make life more comfortable, some clothing and some books and some things to kind of get him along the way as he goes through this process. But, our plan is to continue to support him. He's going to need a lot of support as he travels through this and tries to figure out how to navigate what has occurred and what the future holds for him.
Chief, I think a lot of people are wondering, where are his other relatives? Did no one else see this man for 20 years that they were able to, say anything, report anything to police? Was his stepmother the only person in his life? He said he had two siblings. Where is everyone else? Where are all the relatives?
So the backdrop is being formed, and this is again why the investigation continues. It appears that it was a very controlling situation going on regarding the victim's condition, his whereabouts, his connection with other family members, other people in the community, other friends. Information was very guarded on what was released and when he was able to see other members of the family and other members of the community. And I think that I know from information provided in the interviews that there was a level of fear on retaliation on what would occur if information was released or help was provided to the victim by family members.
Were there any injuries as a result of the fire?
Smoke inhalation, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know if there's any long-term effects from what occurred at the fire, but on scene, he was treated for smoke inhalation.
Could he get out of the house? Did he get out of the house on his own, or the firefighters have to rescue him?
He was assisted out of the house.
Can you be identifying him at any point?
That's a great question. Not at this time, and I don't really know when, if at all.
Where's the mother?
The mother has not been involved in the victim's life, pretty much. From all accounts, around 2 years old.
The suspect is denying all the allegations through her return? Has she said anything about how her stepson would be 68 pounds, for example?
Kimberly Sullivan refused to talk to us immediately.
Do you have a picture of the door lock that was taken as evidence?
I'm 100% certain that we do. I'd have to confer with the state's attorney if we were going to release any information like that at this time.
Does Kimberly Sullivan, have any prior criminal convictions?
No prior criminal history with us here at the police department.
Neighbors were telling us that if he had knocked on the window, they would have helped him. Were there any other instances besides trying to get him to
No, again, I don't, from what we've put together so far, no, and that's because of a fear of retaliation. I mean, he, in his room, to relieve himself, right, had this elaborate mechanism that he created where he would urinate in a bottle, and he had straws connected to the bottom of the bottle, and he found a hole in the storm window frame that he was able to put these straws through. And he did that because the storm window itself wouldn't open up, and he was fearful that if that he broke that storm window or tried to open it up, that there would be some retaliation. So, I'm certainly not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but there's a lot of nuances to people that are victims and held captive, and I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done with this particular gentleman in that area to really determine all the impact and all the effects that this long-term condition has really brought on him. 33 years of law enforcement, this is the worst treatment of humanity that I've ever witnessed. I mean, honestly, when we first started talking about it, we really couldn't believe it. It took a lot of convincing amongst ourselves to just really accept what was going on, and it's really hard to talk about still. I mean, it's shuddering to think that someone would treat any person, let alone a family member or someone that was entrusted as a guardian or a parental figure in this way.
Can you also share your personal thoughts and reactions knowing something so disturbing happened in this community?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, it's just unfathomable that anyone could treat someone this way, as the chief said, especially within the relationship that they had. It's devastating, and we're going to make sure that the systems are working into the future to see what might have happened 20 years ago when this may have been reported. But at this point, it appears that this was just really an isolated sense, and that they were locked in there all by themselves, and through fear and intimidation, she was able to keep it secret all that time.
So when you're talking about the future and other children, the families out there, if there's no protection, and the kids are told to lie about being fed, I mean, what happens? Like, are they going to stay in these situations like you did, or? Well, there's limits, I would think, to what you can do. We can send people out to check and look at it. I don't know what it looked like when the officer walked into the house in 2005, what the child looked like. That's 2 decades ago. And so, it's hard. We can send people out. We could do the checks. We could make sure that teachers, and administrators are looking out for children, notice some of the telltale signs. I think we've come a long way as well in 20 years over looking for these things and being able to report them. Requirements of what has to go to DCF have changed over that time. So I think we can continue to do it. But can I tell you that it will never happen again? I don't think anyone can tell you that, because there's a lot of things that go into this that, can help keep it secret.
Where was she arrested in Southampton?
I don't know. I could get you that information. I'm not sure exactly where she was arrested in Southampton. And it's important, to piggyback on the mayor's response to your inquiry. If you see something, say something. I know it's a cliche, and we talk about it all the time, but all the great work that the media and press is doing now on this particular case, and talking to relatives and neighbors and some school district people. I know some have said that they've made calls, but some have said they haven't, right? So if things are peculiar, it's important to notify the police department. We will certainly look into that information and take the appropriate action. And it may take more than one time, depending on the circumstances we find when we get there. And we know that, through history and through our work with servicing agencies, that victims of domestic violence, especially, are oftentimes reluctant to come forward. And we encourage people that are victims of domestic violence to find the fortitude to come forward, and we're here to help. We really are.
In this situation, though, it seems like, according to the police report, that his life became worse because someone reported it. And after that second DCF visit, the mother pulled him from school.
Correct.
Correct. But you still would encourage people to.
I would. I mean, because you're not going to break the cycle any other way. I mean, unfortunately, in this case, it seems as if an 11-year-old was taken extreme advantage of. And at that time, it's very tragic that occurred. But it will never stop, right? And this gentleman suffered for 2 decades because of that. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but I think it's really important to never lose hope and to continue to report incidents, especially if you're a victim of neglect or a crime.
Was he in the room all the time? Because there were some reports that he was in the backyard doing chores.
He would be released from the room anywhere from 15 minutes to a couple of hours every day. There were some indication during the interview that although his dad didn't do him too many favors when the stepmother wasn't around, he would stay out of the room a little bit longer.
Any motive, like any indication as to why she would do something like this?
As I said, she refused to speak to us immediately, and I hope the investigation reveals more information on the reasoning and the motive on why.
Did he say anything?
No, not to really point to that, other than to describe the agony that he went through and the lack of understanding on why.
Will the sisters face charges at any point?
No, in speaking to the state's attorney's office, we don't believe so at this time. I mean, this is a very open case, very active case. It appears that so far the evidence collected and the information received reveals that Kimberly Sullivan is the sole person responsible, and we're able to charge at this point in time.
Has the daughter spoken? Has the sister spoken at all? I don't recall them anymore.
I'm sorry?
I don't recall the scene where sisters, half-sisters' names are being interviewed in the warrant. Were there attempts made to reach out to them?
Again, we're attempting to talk to everybody in this case, yeah.
So they said no, we're not going to comment?
At this point in time, there's been no statements taken from them. Anything else?
Can you just talk about the next steps in the court proceedings?
Yeah, so, obviously she's held on a $300,000 bond. There is a possibility that she may bond out. She'd have to do that at court. And Mark, are we aware of her next court date? Do you have that date? 26th of March? March 26th, she will appear again. Okay? As always, we appreciate the support and you all coming out. Thank you very much.
Okay, so he answered my question about the father. He passed in January of 2024, and prior to him passing, he was in a wheelchair. To hear them talk about it, she's the one that was nasty. She's the one that was the bully in the family. Maybe the father wasn't. Maybe the father was being bullied too by her. Okay, but I have a correction from what I said earlier. She has been out. She is free on bond. She bonded out. I want to hear what the school principal has to say about this, because it didn't sound like the police department liked what he said too much.
The student in question was a kindergartner, and it was my first year as principal of Brownell Elementary School. And I just remember seeing this kid. He was just so tiny, much smaller than usual 5-year-olds, maybe a quarter of the size. I mean, it's absolutely tiny, and he had no color to his face, and he looked emaciated. He looked like he wasn't eating at all. And as time went on, and again, you're a new principal, so you're kind of getting the ropes of the school. I would walk in the morning. Now, Brownell was an old elementary school built in 1898. It's used for adult ed now. And they had, the kids would come in the morning, and there was an old bathroom, boys' room downstairs, and they had the old type ceramic urinals, which were probably about 4 feet high, bigger than him. And I would walk in there in the morning, and he would be flushing the toilet, drinking the water coming out of the urinal as it's raining. I'm going, oh man, there's something wrong with this. And he would tell me he's thirsty. Then I'm thinking, well, maybe he's thirsty. He can't reach the fountain because the water fountain was too high. I don't know if I called the mother at that particular day, but then I would find him in the bathroom almost every morning, opening up his little lunch. He had a plastic lunchbox that kids use, and it was filthy, disgusting, with just old food and crust and everything else on it. And he would open it up. This is 8 o'clock in the morning, and he starts shoving all his lunch into his mouth. What the heck are you doing? Oh, I'm hungry. I said, didn't you have breakfast? No. Oh, what's going on here? And at this point, I would call his mother, and I'd say, the kid's hungry. He's eating his food in the bathroom, this and that. Didn't get anywhere. He stopped doing that, okay? And the year progresses, the teachers are all concerned. His kindergarten teachers, what's going on? He's always hungry, blah, blah, blah. As he gets into first grade the next year.
Okay, I have to stop right here because I'm like, okay, so you just call the mom. Why didn't you call somebody other than the mom? Because what you probably did was you got the kid in trouble at home now, and you haven't solved the problem. You think you solved the problem because he's no longer doing it, but he got in trouble for what you told the mom. Sometimes I just want to, I don't understand people.
When you go to lunch, we're getting reports from other kids that he's stealing their lunch. He's literally taking it while they're eating and eating their lunch. Now you're talking 6-year-olds now. Kids do stuff like that. So it's not that uncommon, but he was doing it constantly. So again, like Mr. Principal, I called the mother just to kind of say, hey, what's going on, this and that. Oh, I'll take care of it. No, this, not. He's eating. There should be no problem. And looking back, he probably got punished when he went home. So what I did was probably the worst possible thing for the kid. He wouldn't be stealing the food as much, but he was constantly hungry. These teachers, he had the teachers up to 4th grade. They were constantly bringing food in for the kid. And he was just ravenous, devouring it all the time. He'd tell us stories of, he had 2 biological sisters to the mother. And the mother would order pizza, and he wouldn't get any of the pizza. And this kind of stuff kind of broke your heart. And over the years, from kindergarten to 4th grade, between myself, the school nurse, the parent liaison, the teachers, called DCF numerous times. If I'm saying 20, that's probably being conservative. And whether they investigate, you do the paperwork, you do the phone call, they do the investigation, they come back, we went to the house and nothing, that's that. You really weren't getting anywhere going through that agency. After 4th grade, he never went to 5th grade. And I'm not quite sure if he finished his 4th grade at Barnard School, but I definitely know he didn't show up for 5th grade. It was a small neighborhood school. It was maybe 250 kids. You know all the kids, you know the neighborhood, this and that. And so I would start asking the kids, hey, you see this and that? And I knew the kids who lived right next door. And I would ask them, and they would tell me, oh, yeah, we see him. He's in the window of the house waving out the window. I said, well, does he ever come out and play? Do you ever see him in the yard? No, we never see him in the yard. He never plays. He never comes out. I said, well, how long is he in the window for? Well, he's in the window for a little while, and then we see him the next day or the next day. So obviously, I'm kind of concerned about that. I called the police at least 2 or 3 times, could be more, for wellness checks. And I gave statements in terms of there's something wrong. This kid, he's not coming to school. There's no reports of him going to school. Kids see him in the window. What's going on? I don't remember the police literally ever coming to the school to follow up on it, but I remember them saying, yeah, they went to the house, they saw the kid, they talked to the mother, everything's fine. And I would respond by saying, how is everything fine? He's not going to school. I mean, I specifically remember the police telling me, well, the mother said she's enrolling him in Wolcott schools. And I remember actually contacting Wolcott schools. There's only 2 elementary schools there, explaining who I was. We're looking for this kid. What our concerns was, there was no record of him going to Wolcott school. The 2 sisters went to, I want to say, St. Margaret's School, which is up off Highland Avenue, somewhere up there. I don't know if it's still in business, whatever. The 2 sisters, the twin sisters, went there. So we never had any communication with the 2 sisters, but they obviously went to a private parochial school, which was a pretty nice school in Waterbury, and he was at the public school. So we basically, after 4th grade, we lost the contact, other than me calling. And I think myself with the parent liaison claims we went to the house when he was in 5th grade. It's more than likely we did. And I don't think anybody ever answered the door. I remember walking around the house looking. And even farther past, that had to be 2004, 2005. And after that, I was telling you about the after-school programs I do. Yeah. One of the programs at the time I was doing was at Chase Park House, which is on right on the street, the main street going on Sunnyside Avenue. And we'd finish the programs at Chase Park House, and I would just drive across the street, and I would look to see if I could see. I said, that's the house. I would tell my wife the story. I said, that's where he lived. I don't know where this kid is, but I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to see this story on Dateline sometime, without question. And that was not just my thought. It was everyone in the school who had any kind of contact with the school at all. It was inevitable that this kid, you can't just drop a 10-year-old off the face of the earth and he never shows up again. And it's like, no one cared. No one cared enough to really follow up on it, other than me or somebody going up there and busting the door and pulling the kid out by his ear and saying, what the heck's going on here? Which I came to the point of wanting to do that sometimes and didn't, obviously. But everyone really was concerned with this child since he was 5 years old. You knew something was wrong. It was grossly wrong.
How does that work that the school is saying this child isn't in school? How is it possible that, like, he was never accounted for? It's just, that blows my mind.
I think it blows everybody's mind. And whether it was the police who went to the house, and I noticed on the article that it did mention the last report, there were 2 reports of wellness checks in 2004, 2005. They had to be the ones I made, because that's when we left the school from 4th grade to 5th grade. He never showed up. And I knew something was amiss when he didn't show up at the other schools or the parochial school that the sisters were at. And it kind of fell off the face of the earth. That was it. I mean, how, you kind of go on with your life, okay, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe he moved, maybe he went with another. That was an excuse the mother did use once. He was moving with a relative, whether it was Wolcott or someone else, Florida. I kind of remember a story like that, never verified. So that's where it ended up. Until today, when I'm working in the after-school program in Waterbury, and my phone starts blowing up with messages like, what's going on? I never pick up my phone. I just happen to pick it up. And it's all these teachers contacting me saying, do you believe this? We all knew this was going to happen. So prior to you coming, we've been calling on the phone, talking to this one, talking to that one, and saying, oh yeah, we knew this was happening. This is not a surprise to anybody. Everybody knew one day that either the kid was going to show up dead, or he was going to show up in a situation like the kids out in California, the 8 children living locked up in the house. We've read these stories before. It was something crazy like that.
And learning that allegedly he set fire to his own home to escape the situation he was in. I mean, what do you make of that, knowing the child yourself? I mean, not a child now, but having known.
I'm actually proud of him that he had the gumption to do. He was willing to die to get out of that situation. And the same feeling myself and everybody that was involved with him in the school, we're sick because it had to come to that. Because what else could we collectively as a school community do to kind of cry out to say, this kid needs help. Somebody needs to go in there and find this kid and do something. And that's the extreme. He's now a man. He's a man. He's 67 pounds, according to the thing, still starving to death. For how many years for somebody to live like that when you know that that was going on and you couldn't do anything about it?
That many years ago. And as someone, to what it seems like one of the only people that, if you were the last wellness check, one of the only and last people that seems to have tried to make that connection and reach out. Is there anything you want him to know? Anything you want to say?
I hope he remembers us. I mean, it was a long time ago, but I hope the student remembers the staff at Barnard School and how much they really loved him and tried to help him the much they can. And sorry, we couldn't do more because you went through more than any of us ever will go through in our lives. And I'm glad you're out of there and getting hopefully the help that you need, that you deserve. He was a good kid. The kid really never caused any other than taking people's food, but there was a reason for that. He was really a good kid. He wasn't a malicious kid. He wasn't a troublemaker. He remember as a decent student, considering everything he went through.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, just such a profound story. And it's really crazy to me just hearing this, how many attempts to law enforcement and the state you folks made. I mean, you're the principal of the school. Who knows better than you that this kid is not showing up? I mean, that feels like it's a frustrating thing to even, like, I can't even comprehend how you felt. Like, are you, I'm not making this up. So we were just talking about, I mean, it's kind of insane that just to hear, like, what were you sort of feeling as an administrator? You know, you have responsibility to make these calls. You're making these calls. You went to the house. I mean, were you kind of like, what else can I do?
Right. Well, I want to make a point that it wasn't just me. It was the school nurse over and over again, making calls to the mother, trying to get doctors involved with it, because we knew this kid was not healthy, not getting anywhere. It was the parent liaison. It was the teachers. I could remember almost every teacher from kindergarten, first, second, third grade being in my office with me calling DCF together. So, and it wasn't just once a year. It was numerous times a year. And even after he left the school, we were still calling. We were still concerned about it, which brings me to the point was by the time he was going to fifth grade, it was probably around 2005, 2006. The laws were different in school attendance. You could just simply withdraw your child from school and you didn't even have to make a plan for homeschooling. It was a very lax system. And a lot of parents would just say, oh, I'm homeschooling them. And that was it. And at one point, the parents had to provide a portfolio to the principal. Here's what they're doing. Very few ever did it. And it was never mandated in terms of, they never pressed the case on it. Where is it? So, you know.
Maybe if it was today,
yeah,
and this was a 6-year-old, this wouldn't be able to happen. Is that
No.
kind of the thinking?
If DCF's involved, anything's possible. And I'm giving this experience with this young student, but in my 35 years, 14 as an administrator, DCF dropped the ball 99% of the time. It's just the reality of the agency. I know every year they say they're changing, they're going to make corrections. I don't believe it. It's just, and this is a prime example. This is an absolute, I don't know how far they got involved. Once the kid got out of the system, there's probably no record of them. I'm interested to see when they do an investigation, what the DCF records, if they could find the records of the number of times that were called for, well, not just wellness checks, for concerns about it.
So you would say between you and your other, teachers, dozens of times.
Easy, absolutely easy.
Wow.
And just calling the mother. She'd always had a song and dance. There was the typical, and when you start seeing these other stories of these tragics where kids are, prisoners are in their own house, it's so similar to the story you hear. Oh, they're fine. I took care of them. They had all the food they needed. The same song and dance I just read in the newspaper from the mother.
Yep.
It's frighteningly similar.
And, going forward, what's your hope for this student who, I can't emphasize enough that you were probably one of the only people that knew, I doubt he socialized other than school. Like, you knew him. Like, I just can't get, and not many people did. It's just really.
A lot of the kids in the neighborhood knew him. I mean, if you go, well, they're not kids anymore. They're grown adults. He's 35. So I don't even know how many of the kids that were from that neighborhood are still living in that neighborhood. Though it's a pretty stable neighborhood. A lot of it's one generation after another is still living there. If you talk to the kids, they all knew him. They would give their lunch to him when they knew he was really hungry, and they were all friendly with him. He wasn't like he didn't have any friends. It was, so what's my hope? He's a man now. Is the harm irreparable at this point? I mean, mentally, how could you survive something like that? He obviously did, and he went to the extreme what he did to try to get out. So I just pray and wish him the best, whatever his life could be after this.
It's such an act of, it must have been so scary, but it feels like a real act of bravery from him. I mean, I can't imagine what that felt like. And it's really sad for me to think about, if this is all true, that he was there for 20 years. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Anything else you're thinking of now?
I mean, this is like 30 years.
Yeah.
30
Yeah.
years
It's 30, 2002, 2025. We're talking 23 years. Yeah.
23 years. So 23 years, you've been basically, this has been on your mind. And now today, he's finally like,
he's free.
Free. Like, you must be elated.
Bittersweet. It's angry more than anything else. And I think that's the same feeling I'm getting from all my colleagues that I worked with. It's more anger because you knew it. We knew it. We reported it. Not a damn thing was done. That's the tragedy of the whole thing. Yeah, you're elated because the kid's finally free. He's not a kid. He's a man. He's a little 67-pound man. Just try to imagine that. How could you even imagine that? So he has a lot of healing to do, and hopefully he can get the help that he needs.
So a rush of emotions must have been coming over you then today.
Everything.
Yeah.
As I said before, when I'm in the classroom today doing this lesson and my phone's pinging, and I go over and I look and I just see the headline. They say, "Tom, you remember this kid?" And I just screamed. I'm in the middle of a group of 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders doing a lesson, and I screamed. And they all looked at me like, "What's going on?" I said, "Oh, no, there's some information." I shared it with the teacher that was in the classroom with me. But, they knew from my reaction, viscerally, that something hit this guy really hard, and it did. It was.
Did you ever think you would see the culmination of this student's story?
I honestly expect them to find them dead. I said, a story on Dateline. That's what I always expected. And so did everybody else. You don't disappear off the face of the earth at 10 years old.
And remind me, the school was 5th grade the last elementary year?
Yeah, it was kindergarten to 5th grade
Okay,
at
so
the time.
after he didn't show up to 5th grade, he's in middle school
Yeah,
hands.
right. But there was no record. I would check, with the middle school. The feeder middle school is Westside Middle School. No thing. None of the Waterbury schools had him as registered as a student. So he wasn't going to school. And I think the story the mom gave me, she's homeschooling him. I think that's the story she gave to the police. And that was enough to say, okay, the mom said he's okay. He's standing next to me. He's okay. He looks okay. But I mean, Ray Charles could tell you he's not okay. I mean, that's how bad it was.
I mean, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that he's 57 pounds as a 32-year-old, and not trying to sound biased, but I don't know how police and DCF could look at a child.
He wasn't 30 pounds as a 4th grader. He wasn't 30 pounds.
I'm confused on what got lost in translation there. Well, thank you so much. Anything else you're looking at?
No, but I'll probably after you leave, I'll probably think about 20 other episodes that kind of happened over the course of it. I did get in touch with his 3rd grade teachers, and I said, if you want me to share your name, you want to give me information, they don't mind. Even the school nurse, who was really actively involved in the medical issues with him, the DCF issues with him.
Would you like to see him again?
That's a tough one. I don't know. I don't know. I'd probably have it wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't be
I
good
understand.
to see him like that. And,
It'd be hard.
it weighs on your head. Like you could have done, and everyone feels that way that was involved with him. What more could we have done? What could we have done to prevent it? But
Well, you know, oh, sorry.
So there's a little bit of guilt. It sounds like you.
Oh, without question. That was the scream in the classroom today. That was the scream. Like, oh my, I knew it. I knew it.
Well, I take back what I said. It sounds like he was the only one other than the other people at the school that were trying to do anything. And obviously, you know, some of what he's saying is true. If the police say he didn't contact them, but I mean, obviously they did something for DCF to actually go out there in 2004 and 2005, but definitely DCF dropped the ball. You know, for just once, I would love to see them make DCF come up and give a presser and explain why did this happen? Who was in charge? Who messed up? Why did this happen? It happens way too. If I know we have tons of problems in our world and in our country, but if one area needs to be fixed more than any other, I think DCF is probably probably the top 5. I mean, you've got our veterans program, you got all kinds of stuff, but DCF is definitely a problem, and it I don't know how. I don't. It can't be funding. Is it funding? Are they just they don't pay enough, so people don't care enough? I think anybody that does that type of work has to have some type of personality to where they can handle certain things. And maybe after a time, maybe after working with that department and seeing all that they see, they have to put up a guard and they become hardened to those different types of things. It's just, oh my gosh, it's horrible. So it does sound like, according to what the sheriff said, she was the worst one in the family. Her daughters were going to private school while he was going to school for a short time, drinking out of the toilet, and then coming back and then just taking him out of school altogether. She was horrible to him. At the end of the day, this guy, as a man now, I don't know if he's mentally grown, you know, but he saved himself. And it took him a year to do it if his dad died in January of 2024. I wonder what occurred that made him just decide it's now or never. I want to read some stuff to you guys. So according to the affidavit, he was not injured in the fire, but he did have some smoke inhalation. They've omitted his name completely from the report, which is probably good. Once the officers made entry into the residence and they removed the victim, I want to say the victim. Okay, he was born in 93, not 94, according to this affidavit. They gave him medical treatment. The stepmother was standing outside and was uninjured. The fire department was working the fire, which appeared to be mostly contained on the second floor. And it was multiple rooms on the second floor, had heavy fire smoke and then water damage from, obviously, other areas of the house sustained smoke and water damage from the incident. She probably can't go back in that house. When the officer checked on the victim in the ambulance where he was being treated for smoke inhalation, he observed that he was extremely emaciated. His hair was matted and unkempt. He was very dirty, and his teeth all appeared to be rotten. He was conscious and alert, although he was having difficulty speaking due to the smoke inhalation. He reported to the officer that he intentionally started the fire in his room on the second floor using a lighter, hand sanitizer, and paper because he wanted his freedom. He stated that he had been locked in that house his entire life. He stated that he had been held captive at the residence since he was approximately 11 years old. He specifically mentioned that his stepmother, Kimberly Sullivan, keeps him locked inside his bedroom as there is a lock on the outside of his bedroom door. He was then transported to the hospital for treatment before being transferred to, they won't name the facility, and I'm glad they won't. As his condition worsened and he was listed as being in critical condition due to smoke inhalation. Okay. Oh, wow. So because he was in such bad health, it led to a lot more than that. Now, we know now he's okay, obviously, from what the detectives have said. It says that the detective was contacted to respond to the fire scene. Upon arrival, detective was updated by a scene officers of the victim's condition related to the fire and his general appearance. The detective then introduced himself and spoke briefly with Kimberly Sullivan, who was on the scene in a vehicle with her daughter and the daughter's boyfriend. Sullivan reported to the detective that she didn't know what happened and that she woke up to the smoke and went to the victim's room. Sullivan stated she went to the victim's room and saw a large amount of fire in his doorway. She then stated that the victim was saying something about a TV and that she was screaming at him to get out of the room. Sullivan stated that she guessed he ran through the fire because he did end up outside of the room. The detective asked if the victim was diagnosed with any mental conditions, and Kimberly stated that he has a lot of problems but isn't diagnosed with any conditions as his father was against using doctors. She stated that she brought the victim to a psychiatrist a few times because the victim had mentioned hurting himself in the past. But the detective asked Sullivan if the victim was locked inside his room, and she stated that his door is not locked and that he is free reign of the house. While the fire department were still actively on scene dealing with the fire scene, the inspector and the detective did a cursory walkthrough, and they were finding the origin of the fire. They located a burn pattern on the floor of a second-floor bedroom consistent with the fire being set to that location, as there were various burn-up papers and burnt debris. The location is consistent with the room that was described to be the victim's room on the second floor. While fighting the fire, members of the fire department have moved items around the second-floor bedroom, and they removed the door to the room. The detective observed that there was a slide lock on the outside of the door frame, which could be used to secure a door closed from outside of the room. Furthermore, the removed door from the room has a latch that appears to match up with the location of the slide lock. During the early part of his investigation, the detective reached out to Kimberly Sullivan in an effort to further interview her in relation to the fire and the victim. Kimberly refused to meet with the detective and stated that she has spoken with an attorney and will not be speaking to police. Once the victim had recovered to a point where he could speak with investigators, 2 interviews were conducted by the detectives. First on February the 21st, and the second was conducted on March the 6th. Both interviews were conducted at the medical facility that the victim is recovering at. Each interview was audio and video recorded utilizing Waterbury Police Department body-worn camera. That is going to be interesting to obtain. Okay, in the 3 hours that the victim was interviewed, he provided details of the evolution of his life over the past 20 years that amounted to a life of captivity, abuse, and starvation. He was asked what his earliest memories were of being locked in his bedroom, and he stated that his earliest memories started around the age of 3. The family was living on a different address at the time, and he recalled being hungry, which led him to sneak out of his room at night to get food and fluids to drink. He stated that when the wrappings to the food he ate were eventually discovered, he began being locked in his room. He stated that at the time it was only during the evening hours, and he recalled drinking water from the toilet at the time due to the fact that he was only getting about 2 cups of water per day. The victim then recalled his family had moved to another address. It was before preschool, and they omit the address. The victim stated that when he was in the 4th grade, he was permanently pulled out of school due to the fact that the school he was attending contacted the Department of Children and Family Services based upon what he was doing in the school. The victim stated by the time in his life, this no matter what he's been through, and I don't think his mental problems were really all that bad. If he remembers all of this and he understands all of this, the victim stated that by this time in his life, he was always hungry. So when he was at school, he would ask others for their food. He would steal others' foods and sometimes eat out of the garbage can. This resulted in DCF responding to the home on 2 occasions. When they were there, he was told by Sullivan to tell them that everything was fine. After the second DCF visit, he was pulled from school by Sullivan. The victim stated that he was provided worksheets for a short period of time, but the skill level never advanced and no one was teaching him anything. He stated that he always had a lock on the outside of his door. It evolved from a chain lock to a padlock and eventually a slide bolt lock. Not only did he demonstrate to detectives how it operated, but the lock was also observed from the photos obtained from the search and seizure warrants executed at the residence. The victim added that when he first moved to that address, he was in an actual bedroom, locked in, but was then moved to a smaller room. This area was observed during the execution of the search warrant and can be described as a back storage space on the second floor of the residence. So they're not really, they didn't really say closet, but the victim stated he was only there for a short period of time, eventually moving to a smaller room. This is where he has been since the age of 12. This space that the victim was locked in was a back storage space that measured approximately 8 feet by 9 feet. The space also had angled ceilings, making the oh wow. You know what? You know those higher up floors that have the ceilings that come down almost to the floor? Oh, can you imagine? The space also had angled ceilings, making the space that much smaller. They're speaking with the doctor about the victim. He stated that the victim stated during his conversation that the space had no heat in the winter and no air conditioning in the summer. The victim stated that once he was pulled from school, his weekday routine and captivity became brutally consistent for the rest of his life. He stated that he would typically go to sleep around 7:30 p.m., depending upon what season it was. He stated that he would wake up around 3 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. and would be awake for the rest of the whole day and night, noting that he did not sleep well. He was let out of his room for a limited time in the morning around 8 a.m. He stated that he was tasked to complete several chores in the house, which may take him between 15 minutes to 2 hours, depending upon what he had to do. So it's not like they let him out to have space. They let him out to do work around the house. Oh my gosh. From there, typically late in the morning, he was brought back to his room where he was locked there for the remainder of the day and through the overnight hours until it was time to get out and do chores again the following day. When asked how often this routine was, he stated that it was nearly every day. The victim stated that on occasion he was let out in the early evening hours briefly. He stated that there were times when he would be locked in his room for a whole day at a time, equating to 24 hours straight. He added that on the weekends, he would be let out of his room for longer periods of time by his father. He stated that while Kimberly Sullivan took his sisters to events, and they were his stepsisters because they were her biological children, to events and to see friends, his father would allow him to come out and watch television with him. See, this one's like, the dad just let her run the house, and the dad is to blame too here, though, guys. I mean, he should not have let this happen. The victim stated that there were also times when his father would let him go outside with him to work in the yard. He added that the last time he left the property of that address was when he was approximately 14 or 15 years old, stating that he went with his father to dump some yard waste. Okay, this is the part I want to get to. When discussing his father dying, he stated that his captivity and restraint got even worse afterwards. The victim stated that it got to a point where the only time he would ever be out of the house once his father had died was to let the family dog out in the backyard, stating that it was only about a minute a day. Essentially, the victim was locked in the room between 22 to 24 hours a day. The victim stated that he was provided up to 2 sandwiches a day. They were typically deli meats, peanut butter, and occasionally tuna or egg. He describes his food becoming less and less over time, and when asked if he was hungry every day, he stated, all day, every day, my entire life. You know what makes me feel good right now is to know that this kid, or this man, is now eating whatever he wants, whenever he wants. I bet they're spoiling him with that. I hope they are. Along with the limited food supply, he stated that he had the equivalent of about 2 small bottles of water per day. He pointed to the water bottles that were on the table during the interview. When the detectives asked the victim why he never spoke with anyone about his experience, he stated that he wanted to, but there was the constant threat of longer lockdowns and further diminishment of food. The victim describes a life of being mentally conditioned by Kimberly Sullivan. He stated that the threat was that he would not see the light of day if he told anyone, and knowing that he had little time out of his room at that point, it was not something he could risk. He also stated that he once discovered a gun while cleaning. This added to his fear of being hurt. It was unclear when in the victim's life he discovered the gun. He discussed how much of a normal day consisted for him, counting cars as he looked out his window. He stated that he thought of breaking the window, later learning that there were actually storm windows that could not be removed. But he stated that under pain of death, no one was to see me. That was a quote. This is what Kimberly Sullivan would say to the victim. He stated that throughout the years, Sullivan would constantly lead him to believe that she was going to start to unlock his door and let him out more. But then she needed to see if she could trust him. The victim stated that the room being unlocked never happened. The victim described the evolution of his bathroom use. When he was a young child and he was only being locked in the room during the overnight hours, a training potty chair was left in his room to use. Once he reached his teenage years and then into his adult years, he was forced to use bottles and newspaper to dispose of the waste. The victim described how often he urinated into a bottle. He would have to then funnel it into a tube he created with a series of straws and then guide those through a hole into the window to empty it. That's how the police had described it earlier. He continued by describing how he defecated. He stated that he placed newspaper on the ground and squatted over it to relieve himself. He would then roll the paper up, tie it with string he unraveled from old t-shirts, and eventually bring it to the kitchen garbage when he was let out of it to do his chores. Knowing that when the victim was tended to in the ambulance after the fire, the officer and EMT recognized that not only was he emaciated, but there was clearly an issue with his hygiene. The victim remembered telling the officer that he had not bathed in a year or two. When asked about his bathing habits, the victim stated that when he was still in school, he would get bathed every other night. But once pulled from school, the victim stated that bathing would become less and less and less, which ultimately led to him having to attempt to clean himself in his room. He explained that along with the bottles of water he had filled each day with his fluids, he kept one other bottle in his room. He stated that each day he would save a portion of his drinking water into this other bottle. And once that bottle was full, he stated he would do what he could with that amount of water to bathe himself. Oh gosh, y'all. Adding that he was not provided any kind of soap, he only had some men's cologne in his room. And when it came to haircuts, he stated that Sullivan would cut his hair. Body-worn camera footage shows the victim with long, thick, matted hair. He stated that up to that point, he had not had a haircut in 3 years. Besides the occasional television viewing with his father on the weekends, the victim stated that there was no other television viewing. The victim recalled a time where he briefly, 3 months, 15 years ago, had a small black and white television, but it became unusable due to the advancement in technology. The victim stated that his only real connection to the outside world was a radio that was kept outside of his bedroom. He described listening to a local radio stations such as WZBG, WATR, and WNPR. Among these 3 stations, the victim was able to stay semi-current with the world issues. He was able to learn about and follow NASCAR and UConn basketball. Along with a calendar, the victim stated that he utilized the radio to keep track of time. And between those 2 resources, he was able to keep track of time and the years. Speaking with the victim and knowing that his formal education concluded at the 4th grade, he was able to understand everything we spoke about. Each year, he stated that he was provided approximately 3 to 4 books. The victim stated that he also had a dictionary. He stated that he would read the books, and each word he came across that he did not know, he would then look it up in the dictionary. It was determined that the victim had ultimately educated himself. The victim discussed how he was never allowed to have friends, noting that the only time he was ever allowed to have fun was Halloween. He remembered the last time he was allowed to go trick-or-treating on Halloween when he was 12 years old, recalling his last costume being a firefighter. How ironic is that, you guys? He stated that his sisters were allowed to have friends, but the friends were not allowed over the house, stating that he was their secret, stating, "I have been kept a secret my entire life." Regarding other potential visitors to the house, the victim stated that there was hardly anyone who came to the house, and if someone did come, He was told not to make a sound. Again, the threat of food diminishment and longer lockdowns always being the threat if he did not comply. And the victim added that along with Sullivan and his father knowing of his situation, his 2 half-sisters and a deceased grandmother knew as well, none of which participated in locking him in the room. They were just aware. You know they're going to bring up the sisters on the stand. I can't wait to hear what they have to say. When asked about SA, or physical abuse, the victim stated that there was no SA, and he recalled only one instance when he was abused physically. He stated that around 2005, being home alone, he cut out a piece of wood paneling out of the door that he was locked behind. He stated that he was able to sneak out and make his way to the rest of the house, where he found food and ate it. When Sullivan discovered that he had made his way out of the room, she went up to him and slapped him in the face. From that point on, not only was his door locked, but plywood was secured on both sides of the door so that he could not get through the door again. The door was observed in the residence when the search warrants were executed, and there was in fact plywood on each side of the door. And during one of the interviews, the victim was shown 2 photos of the residence, and he confirmed which room was his and confirmed that was the door that secured him in his room. When asked about medical care, the victim stated that he had not been to a doctor since he was a child. He stated that the only medicine he was ever provided was aspirin. He added that he had never been to a dentist. Along with seeing the victim's body being absolutely emaciated, it was clear that the victim had severe tooth decay and no dental treatment to his mouth. The victim stated that when he ate, pieces of his teeth would break off. The victim was asked about the day that he set the fire. He described it as being a normal day, doing chores in the morning, but this day he was allowed out to clean off Sullivan's vehicle. Like every other day, he was given his 2 sandwiches and a snack and sent back to his room, where he was locked until 7 p.m. that night. He stated that he was let out to try and replace a bulb on a small Christmas tree that was on a breakfast bar. When he could not complete the task, he was sent back to his room and locked in. Around 8 p.m., the victim hears Kimberly Sullivan's bedroom door close, and he thought, same old, same old. He added that he doesn't remember what time, but did remember making the choice to set the fire, noting that there wasn't a plan to do so earlier in the day. He stated that he also knew that when he set that fire, he would have to let it get to a point to where Kimberly Sullivan would not be able to put it out, and that the fire department would have to come. I mean, this guy's not dumb, you guys. I mean, this is an intelligent person. I mean, he's educated himself. Because I kept thinking maybe, usually in a lot of these cases, you hear that the child had learning disabilities or behavioral issues, and that's why he ended up, or they ended up treating him differently. That doesn't sound to be the case here. I think it's like Cinderella from a male version. Literally. The victim stated that he set the fire using hand sanitizer, printer paper, and a flame from a lighter. He stated that he got the lighter about a year earlier after his father had died. He said he was allowed some of his deceased father's clothing, and there happened to be a lighter in an old jacket pocket. When asked how he knew the hand sanitizer was flammable, he said, "Well, I read it." He stated that he started the fire on the floor by his door in a stack of games. He added that once the fire got going good, he started to stomp and yell for help. The victim stated that Sullivan yelled to him, asking him what he wanted, and he told her fire. When she opened the door, she asked what he did, and he told her that the radio had malfunctioned. He stated that at this point he was out of it and had collapsed at the top of the stairs. Sullivan made him get up and go to the downstairs bathroom and wash his face, stating that she did not want the fire department to know about his appearance. Jeez. The victim remembers that when the fire department arrived, his sister and her boyfriend had arrived as well. He stated that he knew this because he could hear Sullivan yelling to them to get a screwdriver to get the locks off the door. Sullivan concluded by stating that he fell to the ground again with Sullivan yelling at him to get up. He stated that he stayed on the ground and he purposely didn't get up so the fire department would be forced to get him. The victim believed that this was the only way out of his situation. Okay, now we're getting into the search and seizures. Okay, so on February 28th of 2025, They went to this medical facility that he's currently at, and they did a search and seizure warrant wanting all of his medical records. That same day, a few other detectives and a lieutenant responded to the medical facility to execute that warrant. All of the requested records were provided. The following is a chronological record of the staff's medical notes as they cared for the victim from his admittance on February the 18th through the execution of the search warrant on February the 28th. So he's been there 10 days. Records show that the victim was admitted on February the 18th, and due to the threat of the respiratory failure, the victim was intubated. It was documented that the medical facility showed no medical records on file. This means that any medical facility that shared the same system as this one showed no history for the victim. An early exam of the victim described him as cachetic. They call it cachexia. It's also referred to as wasting syndrome. It has to do with significant unplanned weight loss and the deterioration of muscle mass. The condition is seen in the individuals who are suffering from chronic diseases such as heart disease or advanced cancer. The victim was described as being near starvation. Continuing with the earlier reports and the observations from the medical staff, it is documented on February the 18th of 2025 that the victim is severely malnourished with a body mass index of 11. After speaking with the medical staff for the victim, they learned that this was about half of what it should be. It was also explained that anything under 16 is considered starvation and anything under 13 is life-threatening. It's also noted in this report that refeeding syndrome needs to be avoided. Medical staff at the facility stated that refeeding syndrome is a life-threatening condition brought upon by severe malnutrition, whereby introduction of foods and fluids can have fatal consequences due to the fact that the body cannot process the intake properly. Okay, that makes sense. Oh, so blessed heart, he still has to wait to get some good stuff. So the victim's body is not equipped to handle or break down. That makes sense. I never thought about it that way. So his body is not equipped right now to handle or break down any nutrients. It can have a domino effect of electrolyte imbalance, which could lead to heart abnormality, which could lead to heart failure. He's saved, but he's still so fragile right now until they get his health back in shape. And I can imagine it's going to take months for that to occur because you can't just undo something like that. Records show that once extubated, the victim begins to speak with staff and is immediately providing them with information about his situation, stating that he has been abused at home and not allowed to leave for several years. The staff noted their concern of a hostage situation. So as the medical reports continue, it notes that the victim is extremely thin and weighs about 31.2 kilograms, so approximately 68.7 pounds. The victim is 5 feet 9 inches tall. The victim continued to speak with staff about his situation, which was consistent with what he had initially stated to officers. He stated that he had set the fire because he wanted his freedom. He stated that he had been locked in his room since he was 11 years old. Staff notes that at this point, the victim is fully oriented, his thoughts are clear, and he is absent of self-harm thoughts. As staff continues to speak with the victim, he talks with a constricted effect about what he missed out over the past 20 years. It's documented that over the past months, his mood was angry. He was always hungry, and that he has been tossing and turning in his sleep for the past few years. Here, the victim opens up about his life, stating that he was pulled from the school in the 4th grade because his parents were tired of DCF being called on the family because he was always hungry. The victim explained that he was always asking other students for food, taking other students' food, and eating out of the garbage. When asked, he stated that he doesn't know basic technology and described spending his days reading and watching cars pass by his window. Note that at the end of the detective's interview, the detective attempted to help the victim work an iPad, and it was clear that he had no concept of how it worked. This is up there, in my opinion, with the girls from Cleveland that were rescued. Remember, they were missing for all those years? This is much like that. I've heard that a lot of times those types of victims will reach out to the latest victims of that type of crime, and they try to help each other through that kind of stuff. Evaluations of the victim noted he had decreased ability to use his arms for pushing and pulling. He had decreased ability to use his legs for bridging and pushing, and an impaired ability to control his trunk for mobility. His muscle tone was abnormal with decreased flexibility and strength. The victim had decreased endurance and activity tolerance and impaired balance with impaired motor functions. He has bilateral knee contractures, a condition where the knee joints become stiff and cannot extend. Several muscles wasted, and several subcutaneous fat loss is noted in the clavicle and temple. During an assessment for mental health, the victim tested positive for PTSD and depression. During these assessments, the victim noted that he was forced to urinate in plastic bottles that he would empty by dumping out of his window, and when he defecated, he would do so on his floor using newspaper. When asked, he could not remember the last time he showered. He is noted as being developmentally delayed at this time, having an adolescent cognitive level. When provided a task, the victim demonstrated difficulty problem solving, multitasking, and sequencing. He became frequently overwhelmed and needed verbal cues to continue. It is noticed that he was unaware how to use a microwave. During the detective's interview on 2/21 of 2025, he photographed the victim in his current condition. The photos show his malnutrition, frailty, and the dental health. On 2/27 of 2025, do y'all hear Frankie snoring? On 2/27 of 2025, the victim's Uncle Kurt responded to the Waterbury Police Department and provided a sworn statement regarding the victim. Kurt stated that he had not seen the victim since 2004 or 2005. He remembered going to the address for Christmas Eve for a few years in a row until the family pushed him and his wife away. He remembered that the victim was always skinny, meek, and mild-mannered. Kurt recalled trying to ask the victim questions, but Kimberly Sullivan interfered. Kurt stated that he had attempted to reach out over time, but there was no response. Concerned for the victim, Kurt stated that about 10 years ago he spoke with a private investigator who suggested going to vital statistics to look for a death certificate. In regards to the victim's condition, Kurt stated that when he visited the victim in the hospital after the fire, he stated, "I was shocked. He looks like a Holocaust survivor." So the detectives conducted a WPD in-house database check for the victim, which did not reveal any police interactions within the city since 2005, twice, April 1st of 2005 and April 18th of 2005. Additionally, law enforcement database inquiries for the victim did not reveal any results or records for him. So they also reference an NCIC collect check, and they've got something redacted. Up to this point in the investigation, the detectives have been unable to locate any schooling past 2005. So again, that goes with what he said. The two reports on file from 4/1 of 05 and 4/18 of 05 are reports to the police regarding the well-being of the victim. The reports note that the DCF had been sent to check on the victim and that staff at the school he had been attending was contacting different agencies to check on the victim. During the course of the investigation, 2 search and seizure warrants were applied for and granted for on February 27th and the 28th of this year. So the first of the arson investigation, the second was for the abuse investigation. During the execution of each of these warrants, photos were taken by the forensic division of the Waterbury Police. Now, the room where the fire had started measured approximately 9 feet by 8 feet with angled ceilings. The photographs of the door to his room and the door jamb were taken. On the door jamb, it appeared that you could see holes from previous locks that were utilized in the past. You could also see the locks that were currently on it were functional and clearly meant to keep someone in, not someone out of the room. You could also see that there was plywood attached to each side of the door, not only to reinforce it, but to prevent any tampering of the outer locks. The door jamb and the door were taken as evidence. Based on the facts and the circumstances contained herein, the affiant believes that probable cause has been established and respectfully request that an arrest warrant be issued for Kimberly Sullivan, charging her with assault in the first degree in violation of CGS 53A-59, kidnapping in the second degree in violation of CGS 53A-94, unlawful restraint in the first degree in violation of CGS 53A-95, cruelty to persons in violation of CGS 53-20, and reckless endangerment in the first degree in violation of CGS 53A-63. Let it be noted that each charge carries the date range of March the 7th of 1996 through February the 17th of 2025, due to the fact that the victim states that the abuse began around the age of 3 years old up until the day the victim set the fire. Wowzer. Well, if you've listened this long, I appreciate it. It's been a very long report, but I think we have everything we need here, right? I'll have to timestamp this one for everybody that wants to come in and revisit it as this trial moves forward. We're probably going to need refreshers. Part of me wants it to go to trial right away. And then part of me says, no, I want to give the state to prepare everything, because I feel like one of the problems that's going to slow this trial down is the involvement of DCF, because God forbid they move any faster than what we need them to. So you've got to take all that into consideration. And the good thing is that the longer time goes on, that he's recuperating, he's feeling better, he's getting stronger, he'll be stronger to appear in court, and they'll still have the pictures of him when he was at the worst. But mentally, he'll be stronger as well, so he'll be able to handle the court. I'm wondering if they're going to interview him like on Zoom or something, keep him private. It's interesting because even though you have a grown man in this situation, it is like they have to treat him like a child. We'll stay on top of this one, and I will return back on March the 26th for her next court date. I want to see justice in this one, and I'm quite certain, knowing you guys, you do as well. Until next time, you guys have a blessed day.